You see homelessness from the 30,000 foot level. You're looking at the federal response.
It feels like we're in a dark moment. I think we'd be foolish to pretend like we're not. We have also been here before. Back to the beginning, white colonialism in this country, we saw homelessness. Laws that go back to the 1600s. Philadelphia in the 1820s rounded up homeless folks and put them in jail.
So don't give up.
You can't. What choice do we have? Give in to the voices of hate? Would you like me to go through all the bad Supreme Court cases over the last 200 years?
I mean, how do we fight criminalization?
In 1970, we had 300,000 unit surplus of affordable housing. Today, we have a 7 million unit deficit. And we have dug ourselves into that hole decade after decade. We've solved that problem before, we can solve it again. We went from a couple million people who were homeless during the Great Depression to essentially being able to house everybody in a period of about 20 years. If you look at it, what we're doing is working, and we need more money to finish the job. And we're having trouble getting bipartisan support to do that. You got to work on three fronts at the same time. One is, the second part is, and then the third part is.
Jeff Olivet is the executive director for the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. There's obviously many topics we could cover, and we did cover quite a few topics in this podcast. But I specifically asked Jeff to talk about parts of our past, our history, where it was really, really hard to create policy change, but advocates persevered and made it happen. This is a powerful episode you're going to want to share with everyone you know. So we've had these conversations before.
Right. No, we've been in dialogue about homelessness for more
Forever.
than a decade now, at least.
Forever. One of the things that I kind of wanted to start off with, because I believe this work has always been hard, but it's harder than ever. And it shouldn't be, but it is. And it seems to keep getting harder. And I think people are discouraged. And the last time I saw you speak in San Diego, you gave a few of examples of movements that were against all odds, and they still influence change. Can you share some of those?
Well, I think you're right that we are in this really tough moment right now. It feels like there are a lot of headwinds. There's a lot of negative messages. There's a lot of just angry, hate-filled language about people who are homeless. Being a provider in this work or a street outreach worker, particularly if somebody's had their own experiences of homelessness, I think is incredibly hard these days. And you're right, it's always hard. This is always a crisis. But we're in a bad moment right now, and where we see the housing market's out of control, the access to services and support that people need is just not always there. And so the question becomes, how do you make progress in the face of immense challenges? And then how do you keep hope and joy alive in that process? And for me, looking to previous justice movements, and I do think of our work to address homelessness, to end homelessness, as a movement of social justice, of racial justice, of gender equality, I look to other movements because there have been people who have come before us. We stand on the shoulders of giants in a lot of ways. And I think about the HIV/AIDS movement in the 80s, which was led by people living with HIV and AIDS and by people who had lost loved ones and partners. I look to the marriage equality movement, which took on incredible speed and force a few years ago.
And both of those also incredible opposition.
That's right. Huge opposition.
Huge opposition.
And huge kind of socio-political backlash. And they succeeded anyway in so many ways. We've made huge progress on HIV. We've made enormous strides on marriage equality. I look to the gay rights movement more broadly. I look to the women's equality movement in the 60s and 70s and even going back decades and hundreds of years. And I think most of all, I look to the American civil rights movement really in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, because there's so many lessons to be learned from that can apply to our work today.
Such as?
You never know when the success is going to come, and it often comes after 20 years of swimming upstream. You know, there might be victories along the way. If you look at the progression of civil rights in this country from 1945, when black soldiers were coming back from war, having, fought fascism and anti-Semitism and genocide, and come back to this country and can't sit at a lunch counter or get a hotel room or ride on any seat they went to on the bus. From that moment up to the really the crowning achievements of the civil rights movement in the mid 60s to late 60s, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act. There's an incredible storyline that happens there that has to do with organizing. It has to do with finding solidarity in spite of difference, staying unified even when it's tempting not to be unified, finding joy in music. We were talking about this before we rolled a few minutes ago, that
where's the guitar?
we need more music in this movement, because the music brings kind of power often that spoken word does not. And if you look at a lot of movements, particularly the civil rights movement, the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, they're deeply grounded in music and poetry and painting.
The light bulb went on. Where is the advocacy music campaign? You know, that is definitely something we can look back in history and said it had huge influence. Why aren't we looking at that?
Yeah.
So the light bulb went on that one.
Well, and the civil rights movement was certainly not without problems. There was a lot of infighting. There was a lot of misogyny going on. I think women's voices were far too often suppressed and left out. But there was also just an incredible well of hope and resilience and willingness to keep going in spite of horrific stuff, murders and lynchings and death threats and bombings of people's homes. And
push forward.
You keep going, and you let that resistance power you. You channel that back into the forward movement of the work.
So don't give up.
You can't.
You can't. I knew you were going to respond that way, because we can't.
You can't. What choice do we have?
Exactly.
To give into the voices of hate, to give into the voices of vitriol? No, that's not an option.
You know, where you work now, you see homelessness from the 30,000 foot level more than most, you know, because you're looking at the federal response to homelessness. Can you give a little history of how we got here, what's happening now, and how we can influence some change?
The federal response to homelessness is like one of many dimensions that we need to be looking at. And I think if you look at the arc of homelessness history in this land, and just a reminder to us all that this land is stolen land, and it's land that was built on the blood, sweat, and tears of enslaved people and indigenous people who were slaughtered and whose lives were lost and whose land was stolen. Back to the beginning of white colonialism in this country, we saw homelessness. We saw Native people displaced from their lands during wars. We saw people from African descent escaping slavery and ending up homeless on the streets of New England. We've seen waves of homelessness after the Civil War and during the Great Depression. And since about 1970, I'm not going to out your age. This is in my lifetime.
I'm a dinosaur.
I wasn't going to say that, but you can.
I'm a dinosaur.
When I was born in 1971, we had a surplus of 300,000 affordable housing units in this country. We had invested in housing, public housing, GI Bill, even suburban sprawl, which I'm not a fan of, but there was a lot of housing stock. And in 1970, we had 300,000 unit surplus of affordable housing. Today, we have a 7 million unit deficit. And we have dug ourselves into that hole decade after decade, Republican administration, Democratic administration. We all own that piece as a nation. Private sector, public sector. We have not done a good job making sure that people have a safe, decent place to live. And this is the result of that. Now, there are a lot of other factors. You can track the deinstitutionalization of the mental hospitals, of folks who were essentially incarcerated because of their mental illness, and who were turned out into the community with no support, without housing and services. And so that certainly increases the risk that people with mental illness are going to end up on the street. That's a thread of what we see now. Another thread has been all the wars that we've fought over the last 40 years, from Vietnam, 40, 50, 60 years, from Vietnam through the more recent wars, where people come back from war physically and mentally devastated with traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder. That's a thread. We've not done a great job taking care of our kids, and especially kids who are aging out of foster care, where we see 9 out of 10 young people who age out of foster care into homelessness are youth of color, and about 50% are LGBTQ. So when we create systems that fail people, that let people fall through the cracks, and you pair that with inadequate housing and this hole that we've dug ourselves into, then that's the soup, that's the mix that results in what we're seeing now.
homelessness is a symptom, it's not a cause.
Right.
And while I know there's advocacy for each one of those causes, the homeless sector has really just worked most on the symptom. How do you fix foster care? How do you fix a broken criminal justice system? I mean, the causes of homelessness we have to solve.
I think some people would argue, including myself, that these aren't necessarily broken systems. They're systems that are doing exactly what they were designed to do, which is to keep poor people poor and to keep people of color excluded from all kinds of opportunity. But having said that, I do believe that it's possible to fix systems.
Yeah.
I also don't believe that it's the homelessness system's responsibility to fix all those other systems.
Right. No,
The homelessness system's almost like an emergency room. If you think about healthcare, people are in real crisis. They've lost everything.
Triaging.
It's triaging. It's keeping people alive in order to help folks get back into stable housing and community and connection with other people. What we need now, and I think that system has gotten quite good, actually. Not everybody agrees with me on that across the nation, but I think if you look at the incredible work that homeless service providers are doing, they're helping people exit homelessness daily. We're not turning off the faucet.
Right.
That becomes the other system stuff that needs fixing.
One of the things that really drives me crazy, and there is a homeless industrial complex, just like there's every kind of industrial complex, like a criminalization industrial complex. And people say, well, they're spending all that money and homelessness is increasing. Well, that's because we didn't fix those causes.
That's right.
The nonprofit sector is actually housing people better than it ever has.
Yeah.
We've done this growth of, from shelters to housing. I remember 5-6 years ago, there was a real focus on housing only. Now it's okay, we need shelters and we need housing, which is what we had to get to. So as a triage response, we're getting better. And what the public either doesn't understand or it's being weaponized, the rhetoric that, the homeless industrial complex, they just want homelessness to keep their job, right? It's really hard to communicate that, to cut through that people understand we've been housing people more than ever. But as you said faucet, I usually use the front door. The front door is wide open. Right. More people are entering into homelessness.
Yeah, I think there are a couple things in what you said. One is that the investments work. If you look at the last few years, I joined the administration in 2022, right? Kind of COVID was still happening, but all the resources that we put into communities were alive and well. This was expansion of the child tax credit, rental assistance dollars, cash assistance for people who needed it, expanded unemployment benefits. And all of those efforts, if you look at the data, it really turned the tide on homelessness. Homelessness flattened out between 2020 and 2022 because of those investments. What we didn't do was close the front door. I'll follow your example. We didn't close the front door. And I don't mean we, the administration. I mean we, as a nation, haven't dealt with prevention. The other thing that's important, I think, in what you said is that the providers are doing amazing work that is life-changing for people every day. The outreach workers, the housing navigators, the case managers, the street medicine teams. But if you've got new people coming into homelessness for every person who leaves, then the perception of the public is we're putting all this money into this system and nothing's working, which is not true. It's a false narrative. I do think it's being weaponized, and I do think people are trying to shed the worst possible light on something that's actually working quite well. It'd be like if you went to an emergency room and said, look at all those doctors and nurses, look at all that money we're putting into that, and they're taking care of people with gunshot wounds and burst aorta from a car wreck, and they're doing their job. They're keeping people alive. And we go to them and say, look, they're not solving all of our healthcare problems in America. They're not solving drunk driving.
Right.
They're not solving gun control. They're doing their job extraordinarily well.
Right.
We as a society need to take on the systemic stuff.
Yeah. We have to come at it with a unified message. And we don't have that. How do we get to where we can solve those systemic crises?
Well, I think if you talk with people who are part of any of those change movements, any of those social justice movements, they had plenty of dissension and plenty of heavy duty, knockdown, drag out fights and arguments about messaging and about strategy. I mean, even if you look at the HIV movement, there were deeply divided camps on treatment versus prevention, just even in where do we put our limited money and resources. That parallel is true in homelessness too. We've got people in the homelessness movement who say prevention's not our job. We are the response system. Somebody else should do that. And where I've come to in just over 30 years in this work now is, if not us, who? Right. Nobody's coming to our rescue on that. So we have to get unified on the messaging front. I think you're absolutely right on that. And we have to send search parties upriver. There's this great public health story of these folks in this village seeing a body come down the stream, and they pull it out, and then more bodies and more bodies. And they create sophisticated systems for taking care of people. And then one day this sort of group of folks starts wandering off, and they're like, hey, don't go. We can't, we need you here. And they're like, we're going upstream to see who's pushing all these bodies in the river. I don't think we've done that very well in homelessness. And that's not a criticism of the amazing work that happens. It's that we need a both-and way of thinking about the crisis response and prevention, the crisis response and housing supply, the crisis response and access to health care.
How I've come to look at it is the homeless sector has kind of always been looking at the car wreck that's right in front of us instead of the train wreck that's coming, right? And what I mean is I've been in this for a little bit, and we've done, like, we didn't see the affordable housing crisis coming. I mean, maybe some people did, but it wasn't the conversation when we were doing the 10-year plan. Then you had 100,000 homes, and then we start talking about elderly homelessness. And we've been talking about, we had, Dr. Kushel on earlier today, and she said she started talking about elderly homelessness in 2004. We're so caught up in triaging that we don't forecast, like, what's next. Like, for me, I see AI. Chipotle has a robot that makes burritos. There's a robot that does toilets now. I went through an airport the other day, and there's a robot sweeping the floor. And while artificial intelligence will create computer science jobs, the low-end jobs, right, that people rely on are going to disappear, and they're already disappearing. So when we're doing workforce development, when we're teaching people how to drive forklifts, which will be driven by a computer soon, it doesn't make sense. So we're not seeing what's coming, and I don't know how to change that.
I think some people are. You said this at the beginning of your comment. Some people are seeing it coming.
Yeah. There's people like you. I'm visionary.
I think there are a lot of prophets in our movement, and we don't listen to them very well. So if you look at your work on social media, your work on AI now, but if you look at the folks that were writing about homelessness in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of talk about racism, and we as a field never really picked that up in our analysis of what was going on here just until the last 6 or 8 years. The same is true on the aging of the homeless population. Margot Kushel has been talking about it for 20 years, Dennis Culhane for 20 years, seeing this crisis of older adult homelessness coming. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition has been writing for years reports on the gap in affordable housing and how out of reach apartments are for people on minimum wage. So the voices are out there. We're not always listening to them.
That's why I love talking to you, because you give me answers for the stuff that's in my head. There's a massive deficit of housing for people that need it. How do we fix that? What's the future?
The future is what we choose, and I'll tell you what we chose.
Invisible People is a nonprofit media publisher working to change the story of homelessness. If you can, please become a monthly donor. And together, we can make a difference. There's a massive deficit of housing for people that need it. How do we fix that? What's the future?
The future is what we choose, and I'll tell you what we chose. After the Great Depression, we chose to invest heavily in housing, and we did it in huge federal investments in public housing. We did it in huge investments in middle-income housing, which doesn't solve homelessness, but it takes pressure off the housing market. We went from a couple million people who were homeless during the Great Depression every year to essentially being able to house everybody in a period of about 20 years. It didn't take that long. Now, we disinvested in it over time and have dug ourselves back into a hole. But we've solved that problem before. We can solve it again.
I learned that from you when you kicked my ass in Albuquerque when we first met, when you did the history of homelessness.
It's not a competition. Public
You it
speaking.
is. I'm sorry, you it is. Because you did this amazing talk, The History of Homelessness, and you talked about how the Mississippi flooded.
Yeah.
I remember, and 2 years later, I think that's 1927.
That's right.
And then the Great Depression hit, and then was it the federal transient tax?
The Federal Transients Service, FTS.
Yeah, right.
It was a federal response to homelessness.
Right, and there were art programs and work programs.
Dental clinics, housing, healthcare.
And we ended homelessness.
We got there eventually. Now, what we got to be eyes wide open about is that too was administered in a racist way, that people of color did not have access to the same services that white people did. People of color didn't have access to the same housing that white folks did after the war and the GI Bill. Yeah. So the other lesson to be learned from that is, if you're going to do it in a way that is deeply equitable. But the precedent is there for a massive federal response to homelessness. The precedent's there more recently during the pandemic. We put hundreds of millions, billions of dollars into communities, and it worked. It kept people housed. It helped people get out of homelessness. We've gone back to Congress. This administration has gone back to Congress saying we need to extend those programs because they have worked, and we're having trouble getting bipartisan support to do that.
There's like one person in the world, no, two, that in the homeless space that I don't like to share the stage with speaking, and you're one of them because you always kick my ass. We're at an event, and I was ready for you, and you got up and said, homelessness is racism. Can you talk about that?
There was a lot of amazing work coming together. I think if you look at 2014, 2015, 2016, I think what we were able to do was put together a national discourse on racism and homelessness, and understanding homelessness in the context of its structural racist roots. And there were a whole bunch of people pulling that together at the time. What that's done is helped people talk more courageously about the connection between racism and homelessness. I'm not sure it has resulted in the systems change that would prevent Black and brown folks from becoming homeless in the first place. So we were doing some work in the Twin Cities a few years ago, and I remember our colleagues there saying, we're very good at admiring our data. Wow. Sure are a lot of racial disproportionalities in that data. Sure are a lot of Black folks experiencing homelessness. Sure are a lot of Indigenous folks experiencing homelessness. The question becomes, how do we take it from the conversation to the real change that happens, that begins moving the needle on those horrendous numbers?
We seem to be establishing a thread here, because when you go back to those original movements and how you said there was not agreement on how to move in certain directions, you referenced HIV. I mean, even now I hear some advocates say that you're not supposed to say encampments. Well, the opposition's saying encampments. What we have to do is connect criminalization to encampments and housing to getting people off the streets. That's the connection. And where I'm going with this is, I have always had a problem introducing the conversation of race, connecting to homelessness, almost like it has to be separated. Because whenever I bring it up, it shuts it down. And of course, normally I'm talking to another white person. And you say, well, this is caused by structural racism, systemic racism, and it just changes everything. And even the conversation of homelessness goes away. So do you have any suggestions? I mean, I'm sure you've been asked this before. I mean, how do we effectively message that will actually influence change to get people to say, aha, I see what you're talking about?
It's a really hard question, because I think it's most important that we speak truth. And the truth is, Black people and Native people especially are way more likely than white folks are to become homeless. And the data shows that, but people who don't want to listen to data don't listen to data. The conversation needs to happen. And I think finding a way to talk about that with different audiences is a very nuanced and complicated thing, but we can't shy away from it. And the reality is that homelessness does not treat people equally. It's an unequal offender. Now, are there white folks who are homeless? Absolutely. There are a whole lot of white folks who are homeless. Are there Asian people who are homeless? Yes, there are. And if you break down Asian as a racial category, which is a very large and geographically sprawling category, there are groups within that population who are experiencing very high rates of homelessness. So I think there's a sort of scientific, data-driven way to talk about it, but then there's probably an emotional way to talk about it too, that I think if we talk about what the solutions are, if we say everyone deserves housing, everyone deserves to be able to take care of their kids, everyone deserves to have access to a safe and stable life in the community, that becomes the conversation. It's a more constructive one than, is this about racism or is this not about racism? Because then it's sort of an emotional conversation where everybody just retreats to their corner, and I don't know that that's useful. But for me, it's absolutely essential to keep talking about it and keep talking about it even when the conversation tries to shut down.
Hands down. Let's say people are watching this and they're like, okay, this is all great. We got to fix racism. We got to fix foster care, housing, all this, and please, if you want to talk about the federal response, here's an open.
Well, I think the fundamental thing is believing that it's possible to end homelessness, and believing that it doesn't have to be anymore. This way. It's hard these days, right?
Yeah, I just personally, I used to say that I don't want to be in a game that I cannot win. Right? And now I don't know anymore sometimes.
Well, I think there's the individual solutions and victories that happen every day. I just met a woman here we're at a conference, and I was down in the lobby speaking with a woman who has been homeless. She's very active in the local lived experience group that's an advocacy group driving systems change. She just moved into her own place yesterday after being homeless for quite some time. It's an incredible victory. We see those all the time. So I don't believe we're losing when I think about the individual lives of people who were homeless and are now housed.
That's a great framing.
Now, are we losing the big narrative battle? I'm starting to worry right now. I think the forces stacked against what's working are very strong. But in terms of ending homelessness once and for all, I absolutely believe it's possible. There are
we know it's
nations on the earth that have done that.
Yeah.
There are times in our history where we have effectively done that, even when it has looked pretty dark. And so I believe that it is possible. That's the starting point. I think when you start getting at all the system stuff, it starts feeling very big, and I think people get overwhelmed. How can we solve all of that? Yeah. And I think the simplistic framing of it for me is that you got to work on three fronts at the same time. One is going upstream to stop people from becoming homeless, to stabilize before they come in, shut the front door in your metaphor. The second part is the crisis response, the emergency room, the life and death stuff of getting people off the street and into shelter, into safe places, dealing with healthcare crises and mental health and substance use and violence and all of the really painful, difficult stuff that happens to people who are homeless. And then the third part is scaling up the housing and services because we know what works. Yeah. We've got the technologies. We've got the approaches. We need to invest more. And when the people who are saying what we're doing isn't working are the same people who refuse every time we go to Congress asking for more money through the president's budget, they say, no, not really. And by the way, what you're doing is not working. Well, if you look at it, what we're doing is working, and we need more money to finish the job. I'd like to ask you what you're excited about these days. What's getting your best energy and creativity, and what keeps you going?
You see legacy media is dying. LA Times, Vice, Washington Post, layoff after layoff. And it's an election season, right? It's an election year. So much we as a sector rely on legacy media. Yet people are getting their information from TikTok and Instagram, right? Culture has changed. There will always be a place for text-based news. I'm trying to transition our text-based news to also video news. Jon Stewart said the other day, and he was referring to the opposition, and you can pick whatever it is, right? Abortion, gay rights, homelessness, housing. There's this opposition now, right? We've become polarized. And he said that, you have to be as relentless and tenacious as the counter narratives. So you know me from when I started this, and you've always supported the work. And what I've always done is try to make the truth louder.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still continuing. We had really good success with a Helsinki documentary, and we're going to go into Hennepin County, and because places here that are actually using housing to significantly reduce homelessness. It's not enough, but they need to be highlighted in a way that is as loud as the negative narrative. Now, sadly, I don't have the resources to get up there, and someday, hopefully, I haven't given up, against all odds.
So what keeps you going?
You said something that really sticks with me earlier, and it's always, if not me, who? If not you, who? Right? Because, and I'm not being spooky, we all have destinies. And here's this marketing guy that has an understanding, like some people call me the grand millennial, because I have this understanding of communications, of how millennials and Gen Z communicate, where most boomers do not. And here's this marketing guy that went through homelessness and had all these other experiences. And now I'm doing this against, the homeless sector has been nice to me, but they've never really embraced invisible people. And so if not me, who?
Well, I think you do incredible work, and I think it is the work of change. It's the work of changing people's minds and hearts. It's the work of changing the public narrative. And thank you for the days and hours and years and decades you put into this.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want this in here. You can always, at San Diego, you really encouraged me, as you always do. I'm going to get emotional. I was talking about, because I stand up so much and say, hey, no, over here. No, they're still here. No, that it has hurt me both professionally and personally. And you said, yeah, I assume it did. And that one statement really got me back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is that you're in this battle. And for whatever reason, you've been gifted with either the passion or the knowledge to want to change the process. And it's not easy. So there's going to be speed bumps along the way. And you're not just going to be, the cool kid. You might be the redheaded stepchild. But if you want to influence change, that's your path.
Well, we each have a role to play in that, and sometimes those roles change even for us over time, right? So I find myself as a federal bureaucrat right now for the first time in my 30 years in this work, and I love my job. I love the work. I love a lot of what we're doing within the administration, and it also feels like I'm wearing a costume or a mask half the time, just because it's still new to me to kind of be in that more guarded kind of role. You're talking with some extraordinary people on this podcast, and they each are playing powerful roles in leading the national discourse. But it's also true that every single person who's involved with the local work to end homelessness, the state or national work to end homelessness, is feeding something larger than themselves and feeding a kind of energetic movement that it feels hard right now. I think you were right to talk about that right at the beginning of this conversation, that it feels like we're in a dark moment.
I did that intentionally.
And I think we'd be foolish to pretend like we're not. Yeah. But you can either be defeated by that, or you can be driven by that. You can either have your energy and hope drained from you by that reality, or you can dig down deeper, find connection with other people, and power forward into the future, even through the darkness.
One thing we haven't touched on, which has been the big change that I have seen, I'm sure you have too, and this might be the good transition because this is what I'm feeling, most people are feeling like with Grants Pass, is the criminalization, the growing push to criminalization. Never in my life did I ever think that we as a society would get to the place where even considering forced camps is a solution to homelessness. And criminalization and sanction, I mean, pallet shelters, their businesses increased 7,000%. And it looks like that's where this is headed. The narrative for forced camps keeps getting louder. And that's scary. That's like a punch in the gut, right? It's like, because I'm not just having a hard time doing the work, it's a hard time morally understanding how could people even think like that?
Yeah, I'm deeply concerned about the rapid acceleration of this conversation about criminalization and laws passing and what the implications of that will be. We have also been here before. If you look historically, we've got laws that go back to the 1600s that criminalized homelessness, that moved people from town to town. We had poorhouses in the 1730s that we locked people up in. Philadelphia in the 1820s passed anti-panhandling laws, anti-vagrancy laws, and rounded up homeless folks and put them in jail. We saw terrible federal policies like the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1880s and Japanese internment in the 1940s that were incredibly inhumane and had just hugely harmful effects. Socially, physically, economically, racially, all of those things. And I don't say that to say I take hope in that. What I take hope in is then we were able to find ways to right the ship after that, to protect people's individual rights, to not, at least up until now, round people up and put them in forced internment camps. But I share your concern. I'm deeply worried about the trend we're on right now.
It feels like we're going backwards. As you list all those things, I'm thinking, gosh, history is repeating itself.
Right, because we don't think about our history enough. We don't delve into it. And in fact, history is also under attack right now. Teaching truth in schools is under attack. And so we have to be the bearers of that. We have to bear witness to where we've come from, good, bad, and ugly. I mean, the good achievements of all the social justice movements, but also the detrimental effect that the federal government has often played in racist policies and anti-homeless policies, and make sure that we're not repeating those cycles.
And you have and I'm sure there's bad actors throughout history, right? So, like Prager University gets $60 million. Right-wing funders are funding them $60 million a year to produce 50 videos a week that are now going into schools. They're playing the long game. And it's not just homelessness, although that's part of it, but it's horrible paradigms that they're trying to get kids to latch onto.
Well, I think one thing to remember is that the movement for the civil rights of black people in this country was outspent a gajillion to one by white supremacy groups.
I love talking to you because you always come back.
It's true that even without resources that match dollar for dollar, the ground game, the mobilization, the messaging, the persistence won.
So I can't give up?
You can't give up.
Ah, dang it. I want to go fishing. Mark Doan said something about a year ago that has stuck with me. I repeat it often. He said, the people that are opposing housing are willing to lie. They're willing to be dishonest about it. Whatever their agenda is, they're willing to spread dishonesty, right? To win whatever they're after. And to me, so one of the things in marketing, what they're saying is the future currency, the gold, if you will, is your reputation. Because with all the misinformation that's going on in the world, people are going to say, well, where is the source? Is the source somebody that's credible or somebody that has lied? So you have to protect your integrity, protect your story. So it's just, again, back to the moral aspect is how can people think like that? And then how can people be so dishonest?
Well, I think it's important that we always cling to the truth, cling to the facts, cling to the evidence, and cling to the words and voices of people who have experienced homelessness.
Yeah.
That's grounding. That's centering. That is reorienting towards the real North Star here.
I mean, how do we fight criminalization?
Would you like me to go through all the bad Supreme Court cases over the last 200 years?
No, what I want to know is how do you remember all this
I think
stuff?
we have to fight it on the ground at the local level, and you do that by continuing to work on housing and services and street outreach and prevention, and we keep showing that it doesn't have to be this way. The Supreme Court's not making communities pass anti-homeless laws. Communities have a choice. They have a policy choice of whether to invest in housing and services or to invest in policing and criminalization and roundups. It doesn't have to be that way. There are alternatives to crimalization. We have to keep showing the way.
We're doing a scripted film based in Missouri called Displaced, about a homeless veteran that keeps on getting displaced. And part of what I'm trying to do messaging-wise is two things, is that, if, criminalization will make homelessness worse. And being able to show that, and this movie shows that. I almost gave you the spoiler. An example I shared earlier is I was on the streets of San Diego, and an outreach worker was looking for somebody. They had housing, but because of a sweep and criminalization, they couldn't find them. So here we could have ended homelessness. And then the other is trying to make that attachment that housing is the only way to reduce homelessness. We have historically messaged housing helps the homeless person, and the public is more, what's in it for me, right? What's in it for me? And where I'm going is, Missouri has criminalized homelessness, the state, and the Columbia Police Department was helping us with this movie. And we asked the police officer who was there, about, it's now, your 15-day jails. And he goes, we don't arrest them. We're not going to go arrest them. So hopefully saying that didn't get the Columbia Police Department. But, hey, I love that police officer, but what you're saying.
Yeah, I think we need people throughout these communities saying, no, it doesn't make sense. You're going to arrest somebody who doesn't have a home. You're going to fine them for money they don't have. You're going to create a criminal record that makes it impossible for them to get a job or a house. It just doesn't make sense.
And they're homeless after they get out of jail. And here in California, it's $132,000 a year per inmate per year. It's insane. They're already letting out violent criminals because jails are overcrowded. So you're going to fill a jail cell with somebody that's sleeping on the sidewalk? It just makes no sense. Coming to a close, anything that you would like to say?
I'll go back to where I started, that it doesn't have to be this way. It's possible to end homelessness. It's not inevitable. And it's not like the history going forward has written itself. The history going backwards has written itself. The choices we make going forward as a nation, as a society, as communities, those are policy choices. It's choices about what to invest money in. It's choices in how do we believe about taking care of one another. There's also an individual choice around cultivating and maintaining hope, cultivating and maintaining a fire in the belly, cultivating and maintaining relationships in the work that keep you going and that keep the movement going. So if we've made not great choices in the past as a nation, it doesn't have to be that way going forward. It's still a choice.
Well, you gave me hope today.
I appreciate that.
If you had 3 wishes, what would they be?
I wish everyone on this planet had a safe home of their own. We'll just leave it at that for now.
Great wish. I'm there with you. Thanks for talking to me.
Mark, thank you for having me. Thanks for all the good work you do.